Hero number 12 is Kay Summersby. Now, this is one of the first persons on your list that I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know. She doesn't have the name recognition of these other elected officials. So what is special about Mrs. Summersby?
Well, she is a kind of an obscure character in a way, and yet at the same time played I think, a very significant role in World War II, because she was Eisenhower's. She was Irish person assigned to the British military, and she was assigned to Eisenhower as his aide-de-camp and also as chauffeur, and I suspect kept him off the street at nights, but there was always an alleged romantic connection there, but who knows? And she supposedly never did kiss and tell, but as I understand, and later on, after Eisenhower was dead, they discovered letters that he had written to her, and then I think 7 years to some extent after she was dead, then they discovered letters that she in turn had written, so and indicated they'd had somewhat of a relationship. But when the war was over, they each went their own way, and she was not what you'd call a kiss and tell person. You could put it all under the category of yes, indeed, war is hell, and so people behave differently under different circumstances. But considering Eisenhower's skill in propagating that war and winning the war, why she no doubt was a very important segment of his mental health and ability as a commanding general.
All right. You wrote that she was an Irish driver. Was she from Ireland or just of Irish descent?
I believe she was from probably from Northern Ireland, and but she was but the Northern Ireland was they were part of the British Army, so that's my understanding, and I've never really researched that part that much, but and even people in the Republic of, well, whatever part of Ireland that Dublin controls, the non-northern part of Ireland, even some of those people served in the British Army, and it was a great job, because the economy was such in prior to World War II in Ireland that was, if you could serve in the British Army, you could make that was better money than what you could make at home. So, and of course, once you were in the Army, well, then you had to go where they had to send you. So there's they allude to people in the book Angela's Ashes about having served in the British Army.
It's a really good book.
Yeah. Very
well written. Very sad.
Very sad, yes. And but anyway, that's all I know about that. But anyway, there's a lot of history involved in, of course, World War II. So, and we're even seeing some of that reflected in the Brexit now that England is trying to get away from Germany. Some of the old timers that felt like Germany was sending V-2 rockets on London, and they fought the Germans, and now Angela Merkel is telling them how to eat their spinach, and so they don't like that. So the older people have opted out, apparently. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. I mean, they'll persist and survive as a people. I mean, but there is a sense of something lost for all the young people who could have freely traveled, worked, and studied in all those different European nations. So it's going to be a lot harder for them to get to make a life on the continent now that if once Brexit is finalized.
I don't think the young people came out and voted, and now they're having what they call you might say the morning after, and they've got the hangover now, and they're saying, what have we done? So
some of the people who voted for it also didn't really think it through, and
that's right.
So we'll see what happens. Okay, hero number 13 is Norman Borlaug.
Well, Norman Borlaug was a man that was raised up in northern Iowa, and he did go then to the University of Minnesota, and basically was an agricultural person, although I think he was into other things, maybe coaching and wrestling and other things of that nature. But he was, where he came into play was Henry Wallace as vice president under Roosevelt had gone to Mexico and decided that the Mexicans needed something like the extension service that was what we call our county agents and home extension agents here in the States, and especially in the rural areas. And they needed research, and they needed the extension type service there. And then he went and talked to the Rockefeller Foundation, and he got them to fund a project in Mexico, and they in turn hired Norman Borlaug to operate this facility. And then he was a plant breeder, and especially wheat and cereal grains that increased the yield so much in India and Pakistan and so forth that he's attributed to having saved 2 billion lives because of increased food production. And of course, then the people jump on and say, well, there's the Malthusian. The Malthus was always right, and Malthus hasn't been right yet, but he's sometimes his specter is out there, and as we approach 9 billion people on the planet, and we get climate change and continental changes, and then maybe Malthus will be right. But Borlaug certainly extended the lifespan of many people. So he won the Nobel Prize. I was fortunate to meet him in the governor's mansion one day when he was the Nobel laureate.
What year was that?
96.
1996. How old was he then?
Well, then I got to hear him again the year before he died at the World Food Prize symposium down at the hotel there in Des Moines. So.
And I bet that was in 2014.
Could have been.
For the centenary?
Oh, I don't know. Don't know.
Oh, well, it's kind of a nice coincidence, but it looks like we have a prop here, the Borlaug Centennial. Which, yeah, if you want to hold that up, I think that's probably the bag they gave you at the symposium.
Well, I think this was last year though, when it was a bag that they gave out, and so in honoring him, and his statue is in the national Capitol.
Wow.
One of 2 statues. They had to remove someone's statue in order to put his in there. But that's his statue, his picture of his statue there on that cover. So.
Well, it sounds like quite an achievement he made.
And so, but can you imagine somebody like Dick Cheney getting in his Pontiac and driving to Mexico and looking at research station and trying to make something happen. Of course, Henry Wallace had been Secretary of Agriculture before he was Vice President, and been a plant breeder and developed helped develop the Pioneer Seed Corn Company, which is now part of DuPont, and of course he was influenced. Henry Wallace was influenced in turn by, and I think did I already allude to that in an earlier conversation, by George Washington Carver. So anyway, but Norman Borlaug did the breakthrough on the cereal grains, and so it just made, because those folks over there, basically your wheat, your bulgur, I think they even got into rye, and I don't know about barley maybe, but it's primarily wheat, and certainly increased their yield so tremendously. And then they eat a lot of bulgur, and out of the Middle East they mix up a wheat, bulgur, and lamb, and kind of a meat cereal mixture called kibbeh, I think. So all your Arabs like to eat kibbeh. So anyway, raw lamb mixed with wheat, not
your dish.
Be like a rare steak.
Yeah. Well, the next, one thing I've noticed a trend in your 20 heroes is many of them have a unique or singular achievement. Maybe they're really known for doing one thing that had a big impact, and that one thing, and maybe that's like the heroic act. But I don't know a lot about this next person, Howard Jarvis. What's his story? How did you find out about him?
Well, Howard Jarvis was the person in California, and at the age of 75, he got instituted. He got Proposition 13 passed, and when I read about this, I thought, isn't that amazing? Here's a guy at 75 years old, and here he turns the state of California upside down. And now,
what did Proposition 13 do?
Proposition 13 limited the amount of taxes you could add. You could taxes from the valuation on a home. So your homes were appreciating very rapidly then, and you were an older person. Here's a house you'd bought for, say, $50,000, and all of a sudden it's worth $300,000, and they want to bring the taxes that you pay up to $300,000 based on the $300,000 valuation, and you're a pensioner living on a fixed income, and all of a sudden your taxes going to say from say $500 a year, all of a sudden go to $5,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Howard Jarvis did, Proposition 13 said you could only increase the taxes no more than, 1 or 2% per year on an existing home. Now, when you sell the house and you buy a new one, then that's a different story. But as long as you live in that house, it could only raise it so much. Well, now, so I thought this was amazing that he got that passed at the age of 75. Now you could say that he burned the barn down to roast the pig, but and here's why, and that it prevented people would hang on to a place, hang on and wouldn't let it go, when maybe the normal market forces should have allowed that property to have been sold and people moved and did some other things. A good example of that is Warren Buffett, and Warren had two homes in California. One that was sort of grandfathered in, and it was, let's just say it was worth $3 million. And then he had a house that he bought later on, say for $1.5 million. Well, the taxes on the $1.5 million house were about 3 times as much as they were on the $3 million house, because it had been grandfathered in. So Warren thought that was kind of dumb, but he, you know, if it's there for you, that's what you do, you know.
Yeah.
In other words, it sometimes the tax structure gets in the way of common sense, normal economic trade, and so that could happen, you know. But so it wasn't necessarily that Howard Jarvis, in the long run, what he did may not have been as good for California, but the fact that at the age of 75 he got it done.
So yeah, the achievement is more just that. Yeah.
And it was significant because he, as I say, he turned California upside down in terms of its tax structure. So.
Yeah. Well, all things considered, I'm glad I live in Nebraska. You know,
it's like Voltaire says, nothing is so powerful as an idea whose time has come.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of that.
Okay. Our next one is hero number 14, Frank Bowers.
Well, Frank Bowers was a little bit like the Howard Jarvis. He was a local Des Moines person, and they wanted to build the new, it's called the Wells Fargo Event Center now. They call it the Well, and it's where they play basketball and the big dome and so forth. And the board of the county, the city commissioners and the board of supervisors, all that, they were arbitrarily, they were wanting to do it. They were making the decisions on their own, and Frank Bowers kept lobbying and speaking out. He wanted the people of Polk County to vote on it.
On whether or not to build this arena event center.
And assume bond, you know, responsibility and pay, and you know, have to pay more taxes to build it. In other words, he wasn't saying it was a bad idea. He didn't want it, the elected people just arbitrarily make their own deals. He wanted it to be transparent, and he wanted the people to vote on it and decide whether they wanted it or didn't want it. And so he lobbied and lobbied, and he was dying of cancer during all this, and he ultimately died, and not a real old man either, but to me he was a hero because he was doing what appeared to be the right thing. Now I'll give you a comparison. When the event center up there was built, it was roughly a little over $200 million. Okay, a little later on, Lincoln, Nebraska, went through a process. The people of the county voted on it, and it passed. Seemed like it passed about 56 to 44.
That's right.
And it was over $300 million. So the difference being the people voted for it. Where over here it was all done under, well, less than transparent conditions. So Frank Bowers was lobbying, speaking out for the people to do it in what would, you know, in other words, the people of Polk County did not get to vote on it.
Though this might be your only hero who was unsuccessful in what they were trying to do, yet the fact that you think his heart was in the right place and he had the he saw that he was advocating so strongly while undergoing a personal medical condition, you know, a struggle with cancer, to try to do what he thought was best for his city and the citizens of the city. Like, is that the heroic thing?
That to me is he fought a good fight. He fought he fought a good fight for what I feel are the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, even if he didn't achieve it, and I think everybody's happy now that it's there and it's paying off. But and I think, and I know the one in Lincoln has had people have had some kind of second thoughts, and there's always cost overruns and all these kind of things that happen. But on the other hand, I think people in Lincoln are very happy they've got it.
Oh, it's changed our city, and I think for the better. I mean, more people are coming to spend their money in our city. We have all these new restaurants. Next week I'm going to get to see Cirque du Soleil. They're coming to town to do something based on Avatar. Tomorrow night I'm going to see the rock band Kiss. I saw Paul McCartney from the Beatles and Pearl Jam and Motley Crue and Alice Cooper. I watched World Cup games there on the big screen. To me, it's like there's a lot of value, even if right now the city it's not making money yet on the deal. I think Lincoln overall is a better place because of it. And if the taxpayers have to pay for it, it's been like,
well, but
it's a better city.
They don't have to drive to Omaha or Kansas City.
Yeah, I haven't been to the CenturyLink Center in Omaha since the arena opened, which makes me wonder how that center's doing. I mean, they had to sell it, but that might have been independent of it just because of financial issues with Quest. So, well, all right. Frank Bowers, you fought a good fight.
Right.
So, okay. Next couple heroes are doctors. Hero number 15 is Dr. Frederick G. Banting.
Well, Dr. Banting, and it seemed like there was a movie made about his life, and I think it was called Glory Enough for All. And he was a Canadian doctor, and he's the one who isolated and refined insulin.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the first real breakthrough for people with diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were others who were, let's say, close to the cutting edge. They were well, Banting certainly was the innovator. I believe he came out of World War I. Was a medical doctor, and you know, when they had working with all the soldiers coming out of the trenches and stuff, a lot of carnage in that war. And but anyway, one person that followed him would have been Dr. I'll get it in a minute.
Alexis Hartman? Hartman,
yeah. In St. Louis Children's Hospital, or the Barnes group of hospitals there. He followed Banting's work and writings and stuff and information, and he would go down to the packing plant and get pancreas and cook it down and get insulin from it. And so he treated diabetics and developed what they call a Hartman method, where you basically used a time-release capsule that burned, and then you heated the urine, and you put a reagent in there that would change colors based on the percentage of glucose in the urine, and so you could convert that back to more or less blood sugar And but anyway, Banting was the breakthrough doctor that did that, and because the reason that those things are significant to me was that my second child, Karen, and your aunt, Karen, who would have been 58 yesterday, she benefited from that, and lived a fairly normal life till she was 17, I guess, and then things kind of went downhill, and she lived to 27. Now today, when you look at the technology today, she would probably she was diagnosed at 8 months old, which is quite young, and for most type 2 diabetics, diagnosed somewhere along, closer to puberty, and in that range. But today, if she would probably be still alive if she had the technology that exists today. So, but you got to have those breakthrough people, and Banting certainly was the one that gets the credit for that. So,
what are some of your favorite memories of Karen?
Well, she was very she was a bright girl, had a good mind, and was, in a way, was a lot of fun. But she's very selective. She knew what she wanted, and she went after it as hard as she could. And if I remember when she was in the hospital up in Minneapolis, she'd maybe have 2 to 3 hours of break time she could get free, and I remember we made 23 round trips to Minneapolis from Lincoln. But when you'd get there, she knew exactly where she wanted to go. She knew everything going on in Minneapolis and in suburbs, and she knew exactly where she wanted to go and knew how to get there, and it was truly amazing. We went to the Lake Nokomis milk carton boat races, which is a real hoot. We went to the Anoka Halloween parade, where about 70 or 90 caskets come trailing down the street in all shapes of ghouls and forms. And we went to the La Boca Chica, Mexican restaurant over in South St. Paul. She knew right where to go. We went to always knew right where to go, and of course at that time we just had the 42nd year of Prairie Home Companion that Garrison Keeler just signed off here 2 weeks ago. He'd been doing that show for 42 years. The first one, I think they had 9 people show up at McAllister College there in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and so we got in on that show about 1982. So we've been following ever since. So I did go out and bought 2 rhubarb pies to soften the remorse from missing the show, and because Dorothy made rhubarb pies at the Chatterbox Cafe, and that was like therapy for people when they were really down and out, and it was time for rhubarb pie, So, and rhubarb was discovered up in Minnesota, in the backyard of the Tollefsons.
I did not know that.
And they found out they could do cook it and do things with it, and they decided to name it after themselves. It's Rudy and Barb Tollefson. They named it rhubarb. But one day they had a big fight, so ever since then an altercation's been known as a rhubarb.
Oh.
Well, that's some of that. Garrison. Garrison Blarney, but I know everybody in Lake Wobegon. Now, I may have known them by a different name, but having grown up in a small town, why, you know, maybe they got a different name, but anyway, there are not as many. Well, we only had we had the Johnsons there in Troy, but not many other Norwegians. Well, we did have Evansons, and they were Norwegians. Ole Evanson, yeah. So
he was he was a very gifted storyteller, and I'm glad I got to listen to those Prairie Home Companion tapes on the car trips with you back, in those summers when I come to visit. So I'm glad I got to see him perform before he retired.
Right. I've seen him 7 times, and I've ushered for him. And one night at the Lead Center, he met people in the Johnny Carson Theater after the performance, and I was the very last person he talked to because I was an usher. And then the thing that was my memory was that as you looked down the street, it went out the physical challenge, handicap challenge door to Johnny Carson there on the west side of the building, and he and Tom Keefe, who was his sound effects man, were walking. Just the two of them walking down the street. It was dark, you know, well, street lights, but they were walking back down to the Cornhusker Hotel, kind of like just kind of, you know. But he spoke to everybody, and Garrison was the kind of guy that, and I've heard other people say this, when he's talking to you, you're the only person in the world. And he was very people I knew that had been in, you know, parties and house parties and stuff. He was quiet and he just observed, you know, because he just saw what was going on. And yeah, it's the thing that's going to set Garrison Keillor off differently than, well, he's like a Mark Twain because he's a writer. Now, at the time that Mark Twain was starting his speaking, there were 2 other people that were better known than he was. One of them, the guy's stage name was Petroleum V. Nasby, and but he was much better known than Twain or Samuel Clemens, whatever. But anyway, but he wasn't a writer, and so Mark Twain was a writer, and that's kept him alive all this time. Of course, then from that you get the enactors like Hal Holbrook, you know. So and then of course that's Hal Holbrook has nailed him for sure, you know. And so there's people come here at the old Randleman House, and they have we've had.
Is that a theater, the Randleman House?
No, it's just an old house. It's Civil War kind of home.
Oh,
they're trying to get restored, you know. And so if you holler tomorrow, I'll run you by there. Anyway, we've had enactors. We've had Ulysses S. Grant, and we've had Eleanor Roosevelt, and had Helen Keller, you know. And so it just, you know, these people get into that character, and that you really, really enjoy it. So.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a good time to take a break.
Take a break.